joined today by Dr. Rima Labo. Dr. Rima, as she's affectionately known, a graduate of Albert Einstein College of Medicine, who believes passionately in the informed consent right of Americans to choose their own health paths. She's practiced drug-free natural medicine for nearly 50 years by seeking the underlying cause of every illness and ailment and treating that root cause. Now, Dr. Rima is someone that I've been waiting to speak to for quite some time, because I've not heard anyone break down Codex Alimentarius in the way that she does, but also her understanding of the corruption of the pharmaceutical industry and what's leading to this global health dictatorship is amazing. So she's got a weekly podcast. You can listen live at peopleforpeople.ning.com. That's 3 to 5 p.m. AMT on Tuesdays. You can also find Dr. Rima's podcast on Rumble and opensourcetruth.com. Dr. Rima, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about things that I wish were not true.
Absolutely. Things that we wish weren't true and things that we wish that the mainstream would actually report on. But, even just a quick search of your name on Google and it's just full of slander pieces, which tells me that you're probably telling the truth in everything that you say. So there's a few topics that we want to unpack today, and you and I just touched on that before we started recording. People may remember you many years ago talking about the fact that there would be a global pharma dictatorship coming through vaccines, global vaccine program. That was revealed to you by a head of state while you were treating her in your clinic. Let's start with that, I suppose, and your understanding of how they got to this point.
I have practiced medicine for now 52 years without ever writing. I have a puppy. Without ever writing a prescription for a pharmaceutical drug. And I am by training a psychiatrist, child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist as well, because I have found that there's always a better way. My very first day in medical school, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and willing to believe everything I was told. And the professor of pharmacology that's my puppy, and the other one's back there. My professor of pharmacology in the very first class on the very first day of the first year of medical school said, "Men," and I immediately realized he had started off with an error. He said, "Men, I want you to remember there are only side effects. Every pharmaceutical drug works by the same mechanism. They poison enzyme systems. If you like the results, you call it a therapeutic benefit. If you don't, you call it a side effect. But there are only side effects." So I stuck up my little hand and I said, "But enzymes are the very stuff of life, are they not? There are 35,000 enzymatic reactions in every one of the 10 trillion cells simultaneously all the time going on in our bodies. How are you helping anybody if you poison enzyme systems?" I said in my innocence. And he answered me in a lot of very long words and quite a long paragraph, which basically came down to sit down and shut up. And I said to myself, I will not do that. I will always find a better way. And that began my career as a physician. I graduated from medical school, as you said, from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 1970, which I'm happy to say is still within living memory. And in that time, I have never varied from my vow that I would find a way to help people rather than poison them. And that meant pharmaceutical drugs were out. Right. Well, for doctors who practice non-pharmaceutical, non-toxic medicine, which I call couldn't hurt medicine. I don't know if this is going to help, but we could try it because it couldn't hurt. And I was doing frequency medicine and neurobiofeedback and nutrition and detoxification and intravenous vitamin and mineral therapy, and having wonderful success in a way that conventional doctors rarely do. And I was having weekly, daily miracles like any doctor who practices correctly. And therefore, people were coming to me from around the world. I wasn't advertising, I wasn't telling people what I did, but desperate people have desperate friends. And people were becoming well after they had been told that they had to live with the pain, or there was no treatment, or they should go home and die. And so word spread, as it does when there's a useful resource. And I treated ordinary folk like us, and I treated the elite, although I refused some of them. But a head of state came to me, and she had chronic issues, health issues that we did manage to correct. And one day she said to me, "You know, it's almost time for the great culling to begin." And I said, "What? The what?" She said, "Culling, C-U-L-L-I." I said, "I know the word, but what are you talking about?" She said, "The culling of the useless eaters." Now, this was in 2002, and I had never heard the term useless eaters. Now, partly because of me, I think a lot of people have heard of that term, but I was new to it. I said, "What's a useless eater?" She said, "Not what, my dear, who?" I said, "Okay, who's a useless eater?" She said, "Those people who are consuming our non-renewable resources." And I said to her, "Did it ever occur to you that you're consuming their non-renewable resources?" And she said, "Oh, well, that's an interesting idea." Well, anyway, and she dismissed that out of hand. She said, "It is time, it's almost time for the culling of the useless eaters." And I said, "Well, how many of these useless eaters are you planning on culling?" And she said, 90%. And I said, 90% of what? Can you hear me? So I asked her how many of these useless eaters she was planning on culling. And she said 90%. And I said, 90% of what? And she said, the total world population. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute. Your enormous fortune, this is an immensely wealthy person,
Yes.
your enormous fortune depends on selling massive amounts of shit to huge numbers of people. If you don't have huge numbers of people to sell your massive amounts of shit to, how are you going to maintain your enormous fortune? And she said, "No, you really don't understand, do you, my dear?" I said, "Clearly not." And by the way, I hate it when people call me my dear who do not have a relationship with me. But she said, the mercantile era, which began in the 14th century with the Hanseatic League in Germany, is coming to an end. We are moving to a neo-feudal era. There will be us, the neo-aristocrats at the top, surrounded by our servants and servitors. And that, Maria, was the first time I ever heard anybody use the word servitor in a sentence. Surrounded by our servants and servitors, and around them, our technicians. And that entire short pyramid requires only 10% of the current world population. And she left, cured, by the way, and she also brought me her children to see. And I thought, either this woman is a completely insane lunatic, or she has just given me a deeply, deeply valuable clue about reality that I didn't suspect anything about. And of course, the answer is both, as the world so often gives us complex answers. Because yes, she is a psychopath. She was raised to be a psychopath. And a psychopath has no affiliation or concern or connection with or affection for anyone or anything other than his or her own perceived well-being or benefit. And she also was giving me very valuable information. It had the ring, as crazy as it was, of truth. So I started studying.
I think I just want to pause there. I think we use the word psychopath a lot to describe these self-proclaimed elites and these globalists. But I think it's really important for people to understand that just what a psychopath is, and the fact that
Indeed.
they have zero care for human life, for others, for
Not
anyone
just
other
human
than
life,
themselves,
for any
for
life,
any life.
not a kith, nor kin, nor chick, nor child, doesn't matter, dog Fido, no real affection, no connection, and no affiliation at any feelingful level with anyone or anything, any country, any value, any system, nothing. The only thing that matters to these people who have, in my estimation, surrendered a part of their humanity, an essential part of their humanity. The only thing that matters to them is their own perceived self-interest. Now, they have learned to create a mirror. So you see what you need in their mirror, and the better psychopath they are, the more perfect that mirror is. You do not see them. You see the construct, and that construct can be spectacular because they don't have to be honest and they don't have to be valid in any way. They are never valid. They are only self-interested. Now, you can be a terrible person, a mean person, a corrupt person, a dishonest person, and not be a psychopath. Because, and the perfect example is the mafiosa. The mafiosa can do terrible things to other people, but wife, children, family, that matters.
Yes.
That's so they are sociopaths. But the psychopath has no true affection for anyone, and they are invisible to us, to normal people, because we can't imagine anyone who isn't affiliated or connected or emotionally tied to someone or something. So psychopaths are in fact invisible to normal people unless they learn how to look for them. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And I didn't really understand this. I was at that time and thereafter very interested in trying to understand evil. Because unless we understand evil, we do not know how to contend with it. We only know how to get bowled over by it as a tsunami. So I was trying to understand evil. And one day I went down to my mailbox and there was a book in an envelope from Kamloops, Canada. I thought that was nice. It was a paperback book called The Science of Ponerology, 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 the study of evil. This is not to say the worship of or the appreciation of evil. This is to say the understanding of how evil happens, how it is attractive, why it has sway. And it's a very difficult book to read because it was translated from Russian to Czech to German and back again into English. It's kind of like reading mud. But the essence of it is what I just said to you, that a psychopath is invisible to a normal person because of their lack of affiliation. And for me as a psychiatrist, that made very good sense. I contacted the address, I tried to find a phone number and I wrote to whoever lived at that address in Kamloops, British Columbia. It wasn't a real address. I have no idea who sent that book to me, but it really was impactful. Anyway, a lucky, fortuitous gift. So this woman told me what the plan was. And although it was completely insane because normal people don't think like this, normal people don't say these things and want these things to happen with equanimity. Yes, we're going to kill 90% of the world's population because it will serve us. Nonetheless, it had the flavor of some sort of hideous reality. And as a psychiatrist, I understand the flavor of hideous reality better than most. And so I went searching and I discovered that the terms that she had used, including useless eater, were terms of art in Nazi Germany. I also discovered that the Germans had begun their hideous extermination campaign long before World War II. And I think it's important to spend a few moments talking about it, if it's
Please.
all
Of
right with you.
course. Yes.
Uh, First of all, you need to understand that the person who introduced eugenics, ethnic cleansing, with a supposedly scientific basis to Germany was John D. Rockefeller Jr. He was a eugenicist. He was a phenomenal racist and not a great guy in my terms. And he sponsored the Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes, one in Munich, one in Berlin. Obviously, before the Second World War, Kaiser Wilhelm was in charge. He sponsored the, quote, scientific study of eugenics, or of ethnic cleansing, as the Germans put it into practice. And it was believed that for the good, and this is very important for what we're living through now, for the good and safety and health of the population, it was important to cleanse out, to get rid of those who were a contamination to the society. You might think those who in today's terms were unvaccinated, with the non-vaccine being used for, allegedly being used against COVID-19, which of course we know doesn't work. Anthony Fauci just tested positive for COVID after 2 shots and 2 boosters. So he's had 4 shots, and of course they don't work. And in the
I have a
UK and
theory
the
about that,
EU,
though. I have a theory about
yes,
that, Dr. Reamer. I think that, first of all, I don't think any of them have actually had this injection. But I also think that the reason why they lie and tell people that they've tested positive is to normalize, because there's all these
probably.
people in the population that are thinking, why am I still getting sick? Oh, it's
Right.
okay. Fauci just got sick, so I'm not alone, you know?
I'm
But
sure
anyway.
you're quite right. And we saw Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House, receive her alleged vaccine with the orange safety cap
Yes.
still in place. Yes, that's a tough way to give a vaccine. As somebody who's used needles for over half a century, I would say that's hard. But anyway, the point is that the useless eaters were defined as those people who were going to bring down the health of the German people. This is really important, Maria, every modern totalitarian system has co-opted the medical system that it had access to and used the medical system to bring about its totalitarian disaster. Mao did it, Pol Pot did it, Hitler did it, and we're doing it globally. I call it Faucism, by the way. You may use the term if you like. So, and that is how Anthony Fauci should be remembered. So the useless eaters were determined to be anyone who was defective in any way. This is Kaiser Wilhelm's Germany, and then Weimar Republic Germany. So the Children's Killing Commission was set up in Berlin. That was its name. The Children's Killing Commission had a dossier on every child born in Germany. Any child who was defective in any way, who was cross-eyed, who had an in-turning foot, who had any deformity or any developmental problem between 0 and 3, was eliminated. And the code was very interesting. A child who was allowed to live had a minus placed on the outside of their folder, but a child who was marked for death had a plus put on the outside of their folder. That's rather interesting symbology. Anyway, the Children's Killing Commission used special wards in hospitals where German children were brought, and they were either allowed to freeze to death in the winter, or they were experimented upon with drugs in their heart, or whatever was thought was okay, because they were not human. Even though they were German, they were not human because they were defective in some way. And so they were murdered in fairly large numbers. And the German population said, yeah, well, we're getting clean. That's good. And so the program was extended to anybody age 17. This is going on in pre-war Germany, okay? The program was extended to anybody over the age of 17, and that worked so well that they said, well, let's do this cradle to grave, and let's bring about the grave sooner. And there was a program called Action, Aktion 4, because there were 4 great estates in Germany. The first was Action, where they installed killing chambers for the people that they would bus in. They would say, we're going to have a lovely day in the country, and you'll have lunch, and maybe there'll be an Oompa band. And of course, they were, in fact, exterminated. Now, when World War II started, and by the way, Adolf Hitler, it is important to remember, was chosen and supported and trained by a committee of American industrialists, including John D. Rockefeller Jr., Henry Ford, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Averell Harriman's forebearers, the Bush uncles, George W. Bush's uncles. And John D. Rockefeller Jr. sent his own personal public relations man, John Ivy, to Europe prior to Hitler's coming out party, so to speak. And he conducted a little finishing school for 3 guys you may have heard of, Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels, on precisely how to run propaganda operations and take over large numbers of people's minds and behaviors. So this was all well coordinated. This was intended to be what we're living with now. But oops, things didn't go quite as anticipated. The League of Nations didn't do what it was supposed to do. And so World War II brought about a little pause in the globalist control, the globalist hegemony. But not to worry, we reformat the League of Nations into the United Nations, and we create new organizations like Codex Alimentarius, the World Health Organization. Yes.
I call them the World Health Organization, but I think the
Indeed.
World Holocaust Organization is very fitting.
I think that works, along with the Fraud and Death Administration of the United States and our Center for Disease Creation. So the World War II did not go as it was intended in some quarters, and the heads of IG Farben, the civilian side of the German war machine, the industrial side, the heads of IG Farben were sent to jail after the war concluded. They were basically all the pharmaceutical executives of Germany and of Austria and of the other parts of the German Empire. Now, interestingly, it just so happens that John D. Rockefeller Jr. owned controlling interests in all of those companies. Isn't that interesting? And John D. Rockefeller Jr., as we know, is responsible for the near destruction of natural medicine in the first world and the creation of pharmaceutical medicine, so-called conventional medicine. There's nothing conventional about poisoning enzyme systems, to say the least. Anyway, the heads of the pharmaceutical industry were plucked out of that set of jobs and put into their leadership positions in IG Farben. After the war didn't go as predicted and Germany, quote, lost the war, whatever that turns out to mean, several things happened. One was that these guys went to jail. They went to jail for 4 years, 4.5 years, and they weren't treated too shabbily while they were in jail. And then they got out of jail and they got new suits and new haircuts hats and new shoes, and they went back to work as the senior executives, the president and CEOs and so on, of the same pharmaceutical companies who had during the war been making things like Zyklon B, but never mind. And then they went back into the pharmaceutical business of making people allegedly healthy. Okay. And they were not happy because Germany had lost the war. So they got together and they said, well, that didn't work. What else can we do to take over the world? And they thought about it, and these were smart dudes, including the celebrated Fritz Termeer, head of Bayer Pharmaceutical. And they said, wait, food. We could take over the world's food, presaging by a number of years what Henry Kissinger said, which is he who controls the world's food supply controls the world.
Yes.
And Kissinger, of course, was a disciple of this particular school of evil and still is. Anyway, they got together and they had a meeting and they wrote a letter. They wrote a letter to the fledgling United Nations. This was in 1952. And all of them signed the letter. And they said, you know what? We think that you, United Nations, ought to take over the world's food supply. Why don't you, globalist organization, take over the world's food supply? And the United Nations said, that's a cool idea. Yeah, we should take over the world's food supply. But they didn't have the power to put any force behind that. So they had some very weak voluntary regulations in this thing called Codex Alimentarius, the food code. Now, there had been a Codex Alimentarius in Austria, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, way back into the 19th century, when the courts had to have some rules to decide what was adulterated food, what was unadulterated food, how much was a fair measure, and so on. Governments do that sort of thing. In fact, in medieval England, there was a Department of Weights and Measures, and they went around measuring butcher's scales to make sure they were weighing properly and checking bread to make sure that it didn't have talcum powder in it and only had flour and water.
Yes, if it's for the right reasons, that's all well and good, but that's not what this was. I actually didn't know this went back all the way back to 1952. The earliest Codex Alimentarius documents that I could find, I think, was 1974.
Well, what happened was it took a while. I mean, the wheels of international bureaucracy grind slowly.
Of course.
And it was set up, Codex Alimentarius was set up so that the World Holocaust, the World Health Organization, and the Food and Agriculture Organization, WHO and FAO, which are private companies, by the way. They are private industry-funded companies.
Predominantly pharmaceutical industry funded.
Well, the World Health Organization is funded by Big Pharma and Bill Gates, and the Food and Agriculture Organization is funded by Big Agra and Bill Gates. So, and Big Pharma and Big Agra are two hands of the same cartel wheel. We have Big Medica with Big Insurance right next to it. We have Big Ag to make you sick. We have Big Biotech to further make you sick and alter the plants so that they can tolerate more chemicals before they die. And then we have Big Pharma, which is the same cartel. And then we go back to Big Medica. So it's Big Medica, Big Agro, Big Biotech, Big Pharma. It's all one big happy cartel. So, and the sicker you are, the better they do, until finally you're dead. Remember the culling of the useless eaters, because the plan, and you can read Agenda 21, on which I wrote a book, which has now been placed on steroids and announced to the world as a good thing by Pope Francis at the UN as Agenda 2030. And that says we need to reduce the population of the planet by that old magic 90%. and we need to compress the remaining 10% of the world population. I mean, anybody could read these documents, by the way, Maria.
Of course,
we need
yes,
to
they're
compress
publicly available. They're not a conspiracy. They are there for people to read, but people don't go
No,
looking for it.
they are a conspiracy.
Well,
But
not a
it's not
conspiracy
theoretical.
theory. Correct.
It's
Yes.
not a theory at all. And
You're
I
right.
am not a conspiracy theorist. I am a conspiracy factist.
Yes.
I look
absolutely.
for facts. And when I find the facts, I talk about them. I write about them. So we're going to reduce the population to 10% or less of its current level. And we're going to compress the remaining serfs into 1% of the world's land mass. Why would we do that? Into transit villages, and each person will be allotted 16 square meters as their living space for life. Klaus Schwab said, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Well, you will own nothing because we will have taken everything away from you and allot you your 16 square meters of space. We will tell you what you eat. We will tell you what you think. We will tell you what you do. If you have a job, you will be permitted to walk or bicycle as far as you like without a permit. But if you seek any additional transit, you will not be able to get onto the light rail linking these transit villages without a permit. You will never be able to go on to the 99% of the planet again, because it will be rewilded. It will be reserved for the animals. You've heard this absurd nonsense about animal. Oh, it's okay. As somebody playing with a dog, I thought the dog was screaming, but it was the person screaming. Sorry. You will never be able to go into the wild again. You've heard this nonsense about animals having equal rights to people. Now, we have to be good shepherds of the planet, but animals do not have the same rights of people. If they do, then we afford them those rights, and we say, well, we have to give them the planet, and we will never again set foot. We will never mine, we will never ski, we will never hike, we will never farm, because we have to have synthetic food in order not to use up the farmland, right?
So, Dr. Reema, I want to ask you here, because there was outrage recently here in Australia because our Victorian Premier told people that he brought in legislation that was essentially leading towards you're not able to grow your own vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
He's also bringing legislation that says that if you do go and hunt, you're not allowed to share your meat with anyone else. These are the steps towards what you're talking about.
Precisely.
Which is complete ban of growing your own food. And again, this links it back to Codex, which is going to tell you that nutrients are toxins and toxins and nutrients.
Precisely. So this is all about, a couple of things in Agenda 21, which have been carried forward into Agenda 2030, which are sort of amusing. Any child, it says, who grows to his or her genetic potential consumes, and I quote, more than their fair share of the resources of the planet, and therefore children will be intentionally underfed. But wait, there's more. Any child who comes to their full intellectual potential consumes, quote, more than their fair share of the resources of the planet. Therefore, children will be undereducated. So you create an underfed, small, brain malnourished underclass, the Untermenschen, who serve as the servants and servitors of the neo-aristocrats at the top. That's the purpose of all of this. And the propaganda, the tiny house business, isn't it wonderful? Yes. We can have tiny houses. And isn't it wonderful that We can have children eating bugs in the UK. School children are being given bugs on an experimental basis. Isn't that delightful?
To test their appetite for alternate proteins is what they said.
Alternate protein. Isn't that lovely? And of course, Bill Gates is working on the soon to be hoped for a synthetic human breast milk, and we'll have synthetic meat and synthetic chicken. And of course, the Ubermenschen will be eating the same synthetic crap and bugs that you and I will? Oh, I don't think so. And they can't go into the wilderness. Oh, I don't think so. We're talking about the most totalitarian, the most vicious, the most segmented, hierarchical, abusive system that the world has ever seen being introduced through food and through medicine. And the COVID nonsense was predicted. How did I know? Am I so smart? No, I read their documents. I read their documents in 2002 and 3 and 4 and 5. And in 2004, I said to my husband, Major General Albert N. Stubblebine, a retired U.S. Army general, a brilliant strategic analyst and an amazingly wide-minded, beautiful human being. I said to him, sweetheart, we have to close the practice. Now, the practice of medicine, the Alexandria Institute of Medicine, was how we supported ourselves. And we did pretty good things and helped a lot of people. And he said a really smart thing. He said, why? And I said, well, here's what I've been studying. And here's what's happening to all of our freedoms. Here's what's happening to informed consent. Here's where we're going with this. And I said, you and I are pretty good strategic analysts, and we're pretty good tacticians. And the people on our side, on the health freedom side worldwide, are not thinking strategically. They're only thinking tactically. After a battle is lost, they run around waving their hands saying, oh, isn't this terrible? And then they lose the next battle and the next battle. I said, if somebody doesn't take on the globalist hegemony, we will have no chance at all to survive and to retain any freedoms. And he said, you're right, because he was a warrior. And so we closed our practice of medicine. We sold our house so we'd have some money. And we created the Natural Solutions Foundation in order to take on the globalist plans that they had laid out. For example, on July 14th, 2006, every country that was then a member of the World Health Organization signed an agreement. That's not the same as ratifying an agreement, but they signed an agreement saying in the event of a level 4 pandemic, undefined, anybody could call a level 4 pandemic for no reason or for any reason. In the event of a level 4 pandemic, all world governance devolves to the World Health Organization.
And that is exactly what
precisely the international health regulations.
Yes.
Right. And that is precisely what the new, quote, pandemic treaty will say. Now we pushed
or WHO
back.
Constitution, as they're calling it.
Or WHO Constitution, as they're calling it, of the world government. Now we can allow that to happen if we like being slaves and topsoil, toxic topsoil, by the way, because of the degradation of our food and the injection of God knows what into our bodies, or we can do what we did around the international health regulations and push back, saying what I believe are the 3 most important words of a free person. Don't you dare. And that's what we said. The Biden administration, God help us all, and it doesn't matter whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever it is, they're all sock puppets of the same globalist masters. So the Biden administration submitted last January 13 amendments to the international health regulations. The international health regulations are a separate agency. They're not the World Health Organization. They have their own government, they have their own budget, Thank you, Bill Gates. And they are a separate organization.
Now, every country, I
So,
just want to clarify here, every country has its own sort of agreement with the international health regulations, that how they are, because here in Australia, it says it's legally binding. What we've agreed to with the IHR is legally binding. And I know that our representative at the last World Health Assembly meeting was all for it. He wanted to push this ahead. Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, in lockstep, they want this WHO constitution. They said, okay, because of the pushback that we had, and many of us were involved in it, and thank God for those people, we did put a stop to the IHR amendments. But within
well, we
that,
put a slowdown.
a
We didn't
slowdown,
put a
yeah.
stop.
Yes, but now they're saying, well, you know what? We're on board for a treaty. We're on board for the WHO Constitution, and this is what this meeting is about. Well, they want it done by the 1st of August. Meanwhile, the WHO is meeting next week to talk about monkeypox, which is apparently racist. That's a whole other topic.
They changed. Well, we could talk about monkeypox, which is actually another name given to smallpox in order to make it less clear that smallpox was never eradicated.
Yes, so there are some theories.
Story.
There are some theories around this, Dr. Rima. People are saying that it's shingles because people's immune systems are destroyed from the injections. So this is a symptom
cover-up
of vaccine-induced AIDS.
Yes, and I believe that it is.
Yes. Also, there are theories. I spoke to Dr. Francis Boyle, biowarfare expert. He says that it very well could be a gain of function situation like it was with COVID.
Exactly. And we now know that Gates and I just blanked. Gates and the United States funded the Serum Institute in Denmark, where supposedly monkeypox was held, in the only place in the world where it was held, and they funded gain of function research on this particular virus there. So Dr. Boyle is quite right.
Right. I wasn't aware that we had evidence of that.
Yes, that's just in the last day or two.
Right.
That's the Danish Serum Institute.
Wow. Well, I'm not surprised. And it just so happens to be, around the time that the NTI exercise happened, where there would be a global outbreak of monkeypox within a week of the. I mean, it's actually, when you look at it, it's beyond ridiculous for those who understand.
Exactly. And I keep saying, how stupid do they think we are? And the answer is stupid enough to buy into this, correct. Stupid enough to hand our children to them to be jabbed with something that is obscene. There is no other word for it. The mRNA.
Ask you about that though, Dr. Rima. It's because a lot of people are talking about the long-term effects of this obscene injection. We're talking about a damage to the human genome. We're talking about damage to the human DNA. Is there anything that can be done for these people?
We have to, that's such an important question, Maria, and I've been spending a good deal of time and effort, as have others, on this question. You have to break down the dangers into several categories in order to answer that. In terms of the biological dangers, yes, there's a good deal that can be done. For example, if a toxin, even a bioengineered toxin that is bioengineered to damage the walls of the blood vessels, the endothelium, the lining of the walls of the blood vessels. When that's introduced, then we know that there are things that we can do that will help. We know that N-acetylcysteine is helpful. We know that vitamin C and vitamin D are helpful. We know that dandelion tea has been shown to be helpful. We know that there are other nutrients, vitamin C among them, of course, that are helpful in rebuilding the endothelium and rebuilding the immune system. And on Open Source Truth, my news aggregation site, I published a speculative protocol, a nutritional protocol, to assist people with what we know. But then we go to the parts that we don't know, because what's in those vials is not declared as it should be legally on the labels. We know from very, very fine organizations like La Quinta Columna
Yes.
and other scientists, we know that graphene oxide has been introduced in these vials. And we know that graphene oxide splits itself because of the chemical environment that it's in into graphene hydroxide, which is a single molecular layer razor blade slicing into the epithelium. We know that some of the clotting is because of this. We also know that there are other things like hydras, like multi-celled organisms that certainly do not belong in vaccines. Toxoplasmosis. We know that there are just a wild host of horrible, horrible things unidentified on the labels that don't belong there. And we know that the ways to heal ourselves and help ourselves in those areas are only partly known. And then there's the part that we know nothing about, which is the self-assembling nanotechnology. There can be, in terms of my understanding of the data, there can at this point be no question that self-assembling nanotechnology is introduced in the jabs. Are some people getting saline? Well, maybe they're just lucky, but most people are getting horrendously toxic jabs. And most of them, I hate to tell you this, unless we do the research that I am trying to bring forward and work on the various alternative technologies as well as standard technologies, unless we do that research and do it as a major first priority, vast numbers of people who have accepted these jabs, which are not vaccines, as we know, and vast numbers of people who have been transfected by them because they've been designed to be contagious.
Yes.
They are patented to be contagious, and it's not shedding, it's transfecting. And I've written about this. Unless we find out how to protect people against what's been injected into them and stop the injections now, and unless we find out how to protect people against transfection, which has now been documented and is irrefutable, it's both the microRNA and the spike protein, which is capable of replicating. Unless we find out how to deal with those people, huge numbers of people will die, because 70% of the planet in some air, or 70% of many countries, and in some countries, many more percentage, have been jabbed with lethal mixtures. We are now seeing the pictures of the clots forming in people's bodies. We now are being told, oh, it's normal for children to have heart attacks. Oh, it's normal for adults to suddenly keel over. It's normal for athletes to die. It's not normal. This is vaccine slaughter. And unless we put the effort into the research, private people have laboratories, private people can do the research. People like Ryan Cole are working feverishly to do it. There are good doctors trying to do this. Unless we spend the time and the effort and the money to do this research, it will make the Black Death, Maria, look like a walk in the park, because in the Black Death in Europe, only 50% of the population died in 3 years. We're talking about significantly more than that. What happens to our infrastructure? What happens to our grid? What happens to our ability to produce food? What happens to our ability to produce clean water? What happens to our ability to protect ourselves and our children when 70, 80, 90% of the population dies because we didn't do this research, because we didn't spend the time and effort now to find out what is going on and to find ways to truly protect people? I'm a big fan of glutathione. I'm a big fan of vitamin D. That's not enough.
I agree with you, and I think it is so crucial, Dr. Rima, and what you're saying is so important here. I feel your passion about this subject. We need a solution for what's been done to humanity. We can't just talk about the fact that it's been done and let ourselves be destroyed and die. And I'm certainly not going to be someone's slave, and I'm not going down without a fight. And I know that you're the same, and many feel the same. In fact, those who have lasted this long without succumbing to the pressure of this death shot and have lost so much are getting stronger by the day. I spoke to Dr. Merritt yesterday, Dr. Lee Merritt. She said that there is some evidence to suggest that ivermectin hydroxychloroquine could be effective against removing this nanotechnology, against destroying it. I've heard it elsewhere as well, and this is why there's been such a suppression of it. Do you have any insight on that?
Lee Merritt is a very good doctor. And I am not aware that either ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine does that. I'm aware that it does other things. In my world, the way I see things, I think all the things that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine accomplish can be accomplished with natural means, but I'm in no way opposed to using ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, even though in 52 years of medical practice, I have never written a prescription for a pharmaceutical drug. But if that's what it takes, okay, we can do that. But I do think that vitamin D, vitamin C, N-acetylcysteine, fish oil, vitamin E, and so on are more congenial to the body's systems. Ivermectin does have some toxicity. Hydroxychloroquine does have some toxicity. I mean, I'm not in no way opposed to using them, but I think that also there's less legal hassle with nutrients, although Senator Dick Durbin is once again trying to take away our right to a free and vibrant nutrient and supplement environment here in the United States. Why not? Why wouldn't he do that? Whom does he work for after all? So we're fighting that. But the point is that however you do it, that research has to be done and those methods have to be widely disseminated. I am not familiar with the data that you're talking about. If you could share it with me, I would be very grateful. And if anyone wants to contact me to join forces, to join hands in this research, I'm actually working with some frequency scientists to look at ways of using the frequency technology that I've used throughout most of my career to disable and remove these non-biological particles and restore health to membranes and mitochondria and so on. That I think is a very potent way to go. So if somebody wants to contact me, I am eager to be contacted.
I have
This
another
is
question, Dr. Rima, about this. Those who've been injected directly are obviously, it's a more toxic load compared to those who've had transfection. For example, I'm just fine from what I can tell, but I do avoid people who've been injected as much as possible. Now, and that, as horrible as that is to say, you've got to do it for your health because of
absolutely
the fact that it is we don't want this in our systems. But if those people, we're not seeing uninjected people dropping dead like we are those who've been injected. It is among predominantly those who've been injected. If the people that'll be left over are those who've not been injected, how does that make sense for their plan? Is it because they want healthier people, those who didn't get injected? Because my understanding is this nanotechnology may also open humanity up to things like mind control. And I mean, this is such a huge topic.
Absolutely. Well, that's a very, very, very interesting question. You see, you are using normal logic, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, except these people are not normal people, and they are not using normal logic. If you collapse society, you collapse the entire infrastructure, every single piece of it, those who are left, who have no food, who have no electricity, who have no, I mean, it's 117 degrees out where I am in the desert, no air conditioning, you die. Those people who are left without an infrastructure will beg for shelter. They will beg for food. They will beg for support and sustenance. Save me, please, Mr. Schwab, Mr. Schwab, please, please. And they will be assisted. They will be taken in if they accept the jab or whatever jab is next.
Yes.
They will be taken in if they accept the chip. They will be taken in if they accept the conditions and the terms, and will be so depleted that the plan would go, there will be so depleted and so desperate and in such a state of starvation. In the United States, we have over 100 major food processing plants that have been burned to the ground in the last 3 months. Why is that?
And how many thousand cattle apparently just dropped dead?
Just dropped dead
due to a heat
just
wave.
one day.
Yes.
Yeah, when we've always had heat waves and they don't tend to die like that. So obviously a great holodomor, a great man-made famine is being created for that purpose. The infrastructure will be collapsed all over the world, probably simultaneously. And people will be desperate to survive and therefore desperate to bend the knee and bow their heads and accept whatever they're told to accept. And there'll be a few people out in the hinterlands who don't. That's the picture that is being planned for. And we must say, don't you dare. Don't
they
you
allow
dare.
those people, because there are many people talking about breakaway civilizations getting out there. I think Mad Max when I think of this, but it's not all too strange to be thinking that way now. Will they allow them, Dr. Rima, to be out there?
I doubt it. They have superior forces and weaponry and heat-seeking devices, and they can induce various states of non-functionality from aerial devices flown overhead. No, of course they won't allow it. So people in the United States, we're pretty aware of guns. And so I've heard lots of people say, well, I've got my gun. What are you going to do after they boil your eyeballs with electromagnetic frequency? You're going to throw it at the sound of the intruders? How are you going to deal with this? Be realistic. Our hope is the research and the information sharing that we're talking about, and the clear-sightedness that this is not about being nice or communicating better or just making friends with people who feel differently than we do. This is an intentional holocaust of proportions that we have never seen, that we have to take personal responsibility to stop, in the same way that you and your colleagues and I and my colleagues stopped for the moment 12 of the 13 U.S. Amendments to the international health regulations. And that took a huge amount of effort worldwide. And we did it. And we can do it again and again and again, as long as we're willing to work with each other, stay the course, and not lose track of what's at stake. What's at stake is our genome and our existence as human beings.
Absolutely. That's powerful, Dr. Rima, and you're so right. And it doesn't matter how tired people are, because people are telling me I'm tired, I'm worn out, there it seems to be defeat after defeat. And I say it doesn't matter how tired you are. If we don't keep going, if we don't keep fighting against this, we are finished. We are finished.
They want us tired.
Of course.
They want us depleted and defeated, because we're so much easier to exterminate and to subdue in that condition. My husband was murdered as a leader in this field. And he was murdered for 2 reasons. One was to shut him up, and the other was to shut me up, because anybody who knew us knew that we were so interconnected that it was reasonable to assume that if you took one of us away, the other would collapse. Well, not quite. But that's painful. That's terrible. But that tells me that I'm right over the target. That's where you get the flak. And that's where we all need to be. That's where you are. That's where those who will make a difference need to be, and need to be supporting one another, as you're supporting me by asking me to be on your broadcast, and vice versa. This is a battle for the existence of humanity as we know it.
So sorry for your loss, Dr. Rima. I'm
Thank you.
beyond inspired by you, genuinely. Your courage to continue and keep pushing others to continue despite your life story is, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Thank you. There's a reason I have large dogs and have learned to shoot a gun. I never thought I'd do that. I'm actually quite a good marks person, it turns out. That's a surprise. I've always said, oh no, guns, oh, icky, icky. Oh no, you come at me. Here's how I figure it, Maria. If I pull the trigger, one of the people standing at one end of the gun or the other is going to be dead, and I vote for him.
We don't have a Second Amendment here in Australia.
I know that.
But
I
I'm
know that.
fully supportive of whatever laws the United States has in place to protect for people to protect themselves against tyrannical governments, because that is why you have your Second Amendment.
That is
And
correct.
you know, we gave up our guns, and this is why I often say America is sort of the last bastion, because you still have that ability to fight against tyrannical governments if it gets to that stage. Here we don't have that. We have an insanely controlled population, people that are blind for the most part, Dr. Reem, are very compliant people.
Yes.
So we have to double down our efforts to wake these people up before absolutely everything is lost.
But still, you had more than 1 million people in Brisbane, did you not?
In
Saying no.
Canberra,
Was it
about
Canberra?
500,000, about 500,000. It
Okay.
was about 500,000, and that is a lot.
Saying no.
Yes,
No, no, no.
yes.
And that is so important to, as in New Zealand, a country with very few people, but there were enough people to make noise
Yes.
saying no, and to remind people that no is the operative word of the day, not yes, no. Because if you value your life, if you value your freedom, if you value the ability of humans to think and to reproduce and to communicate freely as human beings, then the word has to be no.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dr. Rima, thank you so much. I've linked in the description before, opensourcetruth.com. I'll also link to the podcast and the Rumble so
Thank
that
you.
people know where to find you. I'm asking anyone who's watching this to share this interview. Dr. Rima is a wealth of knowledge. She's given us the history about these psychopaths, and painted a really important bigger picture here so that everyone can see, according to their agenda, what is in store for humanity if we don't keep fighting back. And for me, that is enough inspiration to keep going every single day. Dr. Rima, again, thank you so much, and we will speak again.
Thank you. And thank you for everything that you're doing, Maria. I so value all of us who can speak freely and support one another. Thank you.
Amen.